answer the question effectively. That's the first thing that we need to be thinking about, is what is the framework that we should be searching for God, or the answer to the question about God's existence and His essence and His attributes according to. And the second point is to not fall into the trap of thinking of spirituality primarily in utilitarian terms. And this is something which it's very difficult for us to actually do, because it's part of our nature to think of things in terms of benefit or harm to us. And even if we are altruistic, then there are both moral thinkers and also other intellectuals who will interpret altruism in terms of self-interest. That even our altruistic thoughts, where I want to help somebody, or I want to sacrifice my own well-being or my own comfort for the sake of somebody else, that is actually not true altruism, but it is self-interest. Because, for example, by helping somebody else, I am giving myself that feeling of satisfaction, or that feeling of superiority that is more valuable to me than material comfort. So altruism is not truly altruistic. Or there are people who might explain it in evolutionary terms, who would say that, well, altruism, even if it is true altruism, it's really only there because it had some evolutionary benefit towards the propagation of a species. For example, if I'm altruistic towards my relatives, then that means that the genes of my relatives will pass on to the next generation, even if it's not my genes. Right? And that passing on of my relatives' genes, which are the most similar genes to my own, will have an evolutionary benefit for the genes of my family. And so that type of behavior will be propagated within a species without any reflection on there actually being any reality behind altruism. So it's part of our existence to think in terms of our benefit or our harm that we're going to get from the decision that we make. Now, without getting into whether that is actually a valid analysis or not, in trying to understand our spiritual obligations, we have to be able to recognize where we are thinking of something in those utilitarian terms. Where are we thinking of something in terms of what benefit it's going to have for us or what harm it's going to have, and to try to isolate that type of thinking and move beyond it to the extent that we are able to recognize that pitfall of seeking our temporal best interest. And the reason why we have to do that is because in the end, any moral quest has to be about reaching the truth and reaching what is right. And whatever we may think about whether it is possible for a person ever to completely divorce him or herself from utilitarian thinking, from that cost-benefit analysis, whatever we may think about whether it's possible for us to ever do that completely, to be able to recognize where we are utilizing a particular philosophy or a particular belief system for our self-interest. If we can recognize that and if we can isolate that, then we will be able to gain a deeper appreciation or a deeper insight into what is truly worthy or what is truly representative of reality beyond ourselves. The question is if we can ever reach that final point of truly moving beyond ourselves and truly having a real sense of altruism, that's a question that we can leave for either mystics to answer or for revelation to provide insight upon. That's not something which we're ever going to be able to provide a definitive answer on from our perspective, living within our own existence. So these are some of the issues that we need to be thinking about, and the perspective that we need to have in order to be able to understand what role God and what role spirituality should play or can play in our lives. With that sort of disjointed, but hopefully not completely disjointed introduction, I'd like to open it up for any questions. And then if we've had a few questions, then maybe we can go on towards a discussion of those areas where there's a greater degree of interest. So is there...
Go ahead.
You talk about truth. Do you agree truth is beautiful or it comes close to God?
Truth? The answer that is given by many schools of Islamic mysticism is that as you approach a greater level of perfection, even as a human being, then you approach a greater degree of simplicity. So complexity is a reflection of imperfection and distance from the source and the origin of existence and the origin of truth. Within the human soul as well, the start of spirituality, and this is coming from the perspective of Islamic irfan or Islamic Gnosticism. The beginning of being a religious person from an Islamic perspective is for me to say, this is what God wants from me, and so I have to do it. I may want to do it, I may not want to do it. I may have to force myself, I may be able to do it willingly. But whatever my soul or myself is telling me, I'm doing what I know is my duty, what God wants from me. As I become more perfect, the difference between what I want and what God wants from me becomes less and less. And so you can express that as saying that my soul, it acquires a greater degree of simplicity. The complexity in the sense of the contradictions within my soul, they begin to be resolved. Until it reaches a point where in reality there will be no difference between what I want or what God wants from me. The verses of Quran that Brother Amir recited, the end of that chapter of Quran is a verse in which God says that, O servant of mine, enter into my garden, meaning paradise, well pleasing to God, well pleased by God. Right? And that is an expression of where God's being pleased with his servant and his servant being pleased with his or her God. That is the same thing. Right? The complexity and the contradiction of the human soul has been resolved into a point where whether you say God wants this or whether you say the person wants this, it's one thing. So that is the human trajectory from the beginning of a spiritual path towards the end. The same principle applies within creation as well. So if there is something that has many dimensions, many facets, and different aspects, then that is a distant emanation of God's grace. Right? The material existence with its contradictions, with its conflict between material existing goods, materially existing things. This is the furthest that you can get from the divine origin of things. As you move away from the material or the low plane of existence, then that complexity is resolved into simplicity. And as you approach the divine origin, God, or perfection, then you reach an absolute simplicity. And so, truth and beauty and God and existence itself are the exact same thing. And there are not even different facets of the same thing. Because Now the different dimensions and the different facets don't exist. It is one infinite, but also infinitely simple existence that has no parts, no aspects, no dimensions. If we give God different names, and we say that, for example, God is merciful and God is knowledgeable, then it's not that His mercy comes from one source and His knowledge comes from another source, or that His knowledge and mercy are a reflection of two different aspects of God. It's that when His simple, unified existence manifests itself in this as having those attributes. Is that?
Yeah.